Hi, this is Pat McDonald, one of the co-hosts for Banter and Beans. Ben Kinsley is going to present to you this morning Bill number S-127, which has been signed by the governor and now is referred to as Act 69. And may I just say, when you go to look on your website, you have to put in the year as well, because this number could have been used a couple of years ago, last year, whenever it's a very strange kind of system. So you have to put in Act 69, 2025, and then you'll get the right bill. And this is a big bill this year, a lot of discussion, and Ben followed it closely, and it's the housing bill. So go ahead, Ben. Ben Kinsley.
It was a big bill, yes, and a very important one. There were two versions originally. There was a House version and a Senate version. The Senate one is the one that ended up getting passed, which is why we're talking about it today. And there were several components to it, and one of them was the Vermont Rental Housing Improvement Program. This was an expansion of an existing program that allowed for forgivable loans that can be used to rehabilitate or create new rental housing units. And it's focused on, accessibility and affordability. So basically, the funding limits for these forgivable loans could be up to $70,000 per unit for units that meet the Vermont access rules. So like for accessibility and whatnot. And others could receive up to $50,000 in funding through this program. Basically, the eligibility requirements are such that it prioritizes housing for existing homeless persons, as well as for individuals with disabilities. So, and those that are displaced by natural disasters. So think the flooding that we've experienced the last couple of years. It is a revolving loan fund. That's how they're able to give the forgivable loans. It's similar to the Vermont, some of the other programs, forgivable loan programs that the state has. Some of them are targeted at homeowners, and there's also a similar one that's created, or not created, but expanded in this bill, that is targeting manufactured homes. So it's called the Vermont Manufactured Home Improvement and Repair Program. Similar situations, situation to the rental version of this program, except that the thresholds are a little bit lower. So it's up to $20,000 for community owners or small scale capital needs. So quite a bit lower of a threshold than the rental program. But similar concept. There's a couple other things that this bill does. I'm going to kind of skim through them and to get to the big one. But the Vermont Infrastructure Sustainability Fund is created within the Vermont Bond Bank, and the purpose of this fund is to finance water, sewer, and transportation infrastructure that supports housing development. Again, these are low interest loans and or bonds. Through the Vermont Bond Bank. So this is, again, a financing mechanism essentially for municipalities to invest in infrastructure to support housing. There are also some changes to the State Housing and Residential Services Planning Committee. It's not a super prominent committee at the state level, but this planning committee is being directed to develop a plan for over 600 support services related to housing, particularly housing for individuals with developmental disabilities. So making housing accessible for people with disabilities, essentially. So there is a report that is due in November that is supposed to be looking at some of these barriers to access. There's one of the more significant changes is that is the landlord certificate program and data access around that. So The landlord certificate is an annual reporting mechanism where landlords are supposed to report details about their rental properties. For example, are they ADA accessible? What are the names of the renters? And things like that. So this um, this sort of amends some of the reporting requirements, as well as it directs that a public database be created, so that this data is searchable by the public. Um, let's see. There's a couple other reporting requirements in here that are not super significant, but the the last two items. Well, I shouldn't say the last two items. Um, The most significant one is the CHIP program, and this is the one we
Right.
followed very closely. This is also the point of contention between the House and the Senate. So the House and the Senate had different approaches to the CHIP program and how expansive they wanted it to be. And CHIP stands for Community Housing and Infrastructure Program, so acronym CHIP. And it's a tax increment financing mechanism. And Vermont has had also known as TIF.
Right.
Vermont has had a TIF system for quite a few years now, but it's always been a district-based TIF. So, like you said, a geographic area, and there can be multiple projects within that geographic area. And the TIF, the mechanism for that basically is the municipality freezes the current property value. So if it's an empty lot, you're freezing the property value as an empty lot. And in order to gain the incremental revenue that, from the development effort. So you build a building, property value goes up, and instead of taxing that, they're using that extra revenue that would have been taxed by the municipal property tax or the education property tax, and they're using that as a financing mechanism to invest in infrastructure. So basically, they're building the infrastructure up front, getting a bond or a loan to finance that, and then they're paying it back with this incremental revenue. So it's called tax increment financing. And so it's always been like a geographic base, like a neighborhood or a block inside a town or a city. The CHIP program is different. It's project based. And so it is an individual development project, could be a building or a parking garage or, whatever, a public park, um, any of those things, business. So this one is focused on housing. It is project based. The idea behind the project based one is that it's easier for small municipalities to take advantage of it. So it's not going to be just Burlington and Rutland and Montpelier and like those places. It's basically almost any town could do it because the requirements are a lot easier to manage when it's a specific project. And so, there was a lot of argument or a lot of debate between the House and the Senate over how they wanted to structure this program. This is seen as a potentially massive funding mechanism. The state has pretty lofty goals for housing development. We need about 7,500 units a year for the next 10 years in order to meet demand. And the Senate really felt like this program was the linchpin in reaching that. So they were very aggressive about pushing the caps on the program. The House wanted much lower caps, but the Senate pushed for $200 million annually. That $200 million in annual cap revenue, like how many properties or how many development projects could be in that program or be added to that program annually. It's pretty high cap, and it can support about potentially half of the housing development that we need in the state. So on an annual basis. So that is sort of where that the thought process around that developed.
That's cool. That there was so much debate and discussion and testimony on these bills. I much prefer the Senate bill. I'm glad that that's the one that passed through. Um, can I just ask you? You may not know this, and I obviously don't know the answer. They they had people that were staying in motels leave recently. They said no
Yeah.
more money. What happens to those people under this bill? How do they get back into housing? Because every church that I know of is doing a writing campaign or a call-in campaign to the governor to get him to rethink that move about moving people out with babies and kids. And so,
Yeah.
how do they get housing?
So that's a great question. So like, I mean, there's a probably 1,000 different stories about how those folks ended up without a home.
Right,
The reality is our current costs of affordable housing. So this is the housing that the state invests in that's supposed to be affordable. Current
right,
costs of construction is over $500 a square foot for affordable housing. If you think about that, $500 per square foot for a modest 1,000 square foot home is $500,000. An average sized home, which may be 2,000 square feet, is going to be over $1 million at that cost of construction. So we need to lower the cost of construction in Vermont. We are not going to be able to build our way out of this problem.
yep,
And so, the motel voucher program, while it's gotten a lot of headlines, was a temporary solution. And it is even more expensive than actually building like affordable housing.
right,
Um, but we've seen this in other places too, where the cost of construction, the cost of housing is very, very high. Like the Bay Area in California, homelessness follows. Like when rents are high, when the cost of
right,
home ownership is high, homelessness follows. And so this has been pretty well documented at this point. Um, there's a book that came out earlier this year called Abundance, written by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, and detailed this. That the cost of housing is one of the number one issues when it comes to homelessness, because you decrease the cost of housing, and we see examples where homelessness falls in response to it because more people can access it, and the state safety net systems can better afford to get people back into transitional housing.
uh, well, it just, we've heard all kinds of stories. Kids that need insulin, and these people don't have access to refrigeration, and the stories go on and on. It's a, I don't know if you'd call it a crisis, but it sounds like it to me. We've got just too many people sleeping outside and trying to exist with kids. It's pretty sad. And those
Yeah, and
aren't
the
middle income.
program, the motel voucher program, does prioritize families with kids and families with
Right,
specific medical needs. Um, it is also seasonal, and that's sort of intentional so that, you
right.
know, in the winter months in particular, more people can get into housing.
Yeah,
And so when you see the headlines about folks getting kicked out, there's two things going on there. One is that the the previous funding for the program expired at the end of June, when the state fiscal year kicked over.
right,
The program still exists, but it is more limited funding now, and it is also more seasonal. So slots will start opening back up again in
um,
later in the fall. So that was, we're trying to two things that were happening simultaneously. There was a bunch of people that lost access to that program this spring when the seasonal slots expired, and
right.
then we'll get access again later this fall potentially.
Well, I hope it all works out at the end, because it's pretty tragic when you hear when you meet these people and they tell you their story and what they're experiencing. And thank goodness it is a little warm out there, because we lost two couples in the winter from the cold. You go to sleep and there you go. It's
Well,
pretty.
the one of them, I think This was in the Montpelier area, right?
Yeah, right. Mhm.
One of them turned out to be an overdose.
Oh,
But I think that um, homelessness is tragic in general. When you and it's not just homelessness. You think about, so many people, very high percentage of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, meaning that, yeah, like one paycheck doesn't come through for some reason, and
yeah, the mess.
or you have an unplanned expense that chews up an entire paycheck. Uh, that family is suddenly in financial distress. It could be a
Right,
car breakdown, it could be a fire, it could be loss of employment. All of these sorts of things can put a family in financial distress. And so, you know, there's a lot of people that could be one paycheck away from
right,
homelessness.
exactly.
And that is a structural problem in our state when we have really high costs of living. And so, you know, yes, there's all these people that are currently in homelessness and we need to help them. There's also a bunch of people that are right on the teetering edge of homelessness, and we need to be conscious that we're not pushing them over that edge.
Right, I agree with you anyway. Well, this has been very interesting and clearly one of the most important bills of this session. Just so glad it was the Senate bill. They did a good job on this bill. Thank you, Ben Kinsley, very much for telling us about this bill. Hope it
Hope it makes an
keeps the
impact.
momentum. Yeah, hope the momentum keeps going because we really do need housing here. It's terrible. Thank you very much. This is Pat McDonald and Ben Kinsley, your hosts for Banter and Beans.